Darkness was there, all wrapped around by darkness, and all was water indiscriminate. The Rig Veda. In many creation myths, the world emerged from an infinite primeval ocean. The molecule of life, the matrix of the world, cosmic juice. Behold, water. Paracelsus, a Swiss physician and alchemist circa 1531, proclaimed, "Behold the element of water in its undifferentiated state. And then we see how all the metals, all the stones, all the glittering rubies, shining carbuncles, crystals, gold and silver are derived from it. Who could have recognized all these things in water? But it is water that is the most precious gem of all, as Barbara Kingsolver, the North American novelist, writes. It is the gold standard of biological currency." She says, water is life. It's the briny broth of our origins, the pounding circulatory system of the world, a precarious molecular edge on which we survive. It makes up 2/3 of our bodies, just like the map of the world. Our vital fluids are saline, like the ocean. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. As Philip Ball, the British science writer, said in his opus on water, some substances become mythical. They transcend their physical and chemical materiality and manifest themselves in our minds as symbols, as qualities. Water is one such unique substance, and in its various forms, as salty ocean water, as sweet river water, or as rain, it has played a major role in human myths. John Steinbeck, North American author, wrote in the log from the Sea of Cortez of how all things are one thing, and that one thing is all things. Plankton, a shimmering phosphorescence on the sea, and the spinning planets, and an expanding universe, all bound together by the elastic string of time. He advises us to look from the tidepool to the stars, and then back to the tidepool again. Welcome to the Subverse. I'm your host, Susan Matthews. With this podcast, we will voyage from the cosmic to the quantum, from cells to cities, from colonial histories to reimagining futures, with an eye and ear also towards the subterranean and the submerged. In the second season of our podcast, we have decided to go on a sonic quest around the theme of water. And in this episode, we will take Steinbeck's advice, but start from the stars and head to the tidepool. This episode will also lay out in some trickles some of the liquid ground we will cover over the remainder of the season. There are so many ways to tell the story, and what a story it is. So many forking paths, tributaries, and springs, so much depth and flow, the phases of water from liquid to gas to its solid state, to its bentness, its uniqueness. It is so everyday, so ordinary and garden variety, and at the same time, so otherworldly, so exceptional, and so exemplary. Where do we begin? We begin in this episode with Starburst. Philip Ball, in his biography of water, writes that water, this molecule H2O, this matrix of life, is the product of the universe's two most generous acts of creation, the Big Bang and star formation. The Big Bang gave us hydrogen, and stellar evolution gave us oxygen, and all other elements, the alphabets of chemistry. Somewhere in interstellar space, these two elements united, and water was born. Water is everywhere in the solar system. Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Mars, and Jupiter. Many of their moons were formed from a solar nebula that contained water, the debris left by previous generations of stars, writes Giulio Boccoletti, a British-Italian scientist and author, in Water, a Biography. Philip Ball writes, 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was still a molten magma ball, seething from the collision that ejected the moon. Earth was in the hot zone, in the inner solar circle, along with some other rocky orbs. At some point, as theory goes, water did arrive, maybe carried by rocky boulders. They could be asteroids or meteorites. The gist is that a colder body or colder bodies may have collided with hot Earth. If it did, it is this provident collision that gave us a chance at life. And once it got here to Earth, water could never leave. It has stayed as a fixed quantity of water that cannot escape Earth's boundaries. An accidental tourist making its home on Earth. Philip Ball notes that those formative years were steamy times on Earth, for all that water was in the sky. And then, one fine day, the temperature on Earth had fallen far enough to condense. Clouds massed in the sky, and the oceans rained down. What he calls the original flood, the one that set the stage for life's entry. It turned our world into the pale blue dot that Carl Sagan so beautifully evoked. The blueness of Earth is an anomaly in the solar system. No other planet or satellite has surface oceans of liquid water, and 97% of that water that came to Earth resides in our oceans. The remainder is divided between ice caps, groundwater, and a tiny fraction in lakes, rivers, and soils. And an even tinier fraction is water vapor. And it is this vapor that gives us an atmosphere in the first place, acting as an enormous blanket over the planet, trapping outgoing heat. And for the rest, some ice and water droplets that form the clouds, floating in the sky, a layer the thickness of a human hair, so crucial to the hydrological cycle. Only about 2.5% of the world's water is fresh. The remainder is salty. Once it got here, over ice ages and big melts, the future of the Earth changed and was transformed by water. An extraordinary, extraterrestrial agent of geological, environmental, geopolitical, and global change. As Walt Whitman, the North American poet, wrote, "A leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars. And for me, water is one of its great wonders." So now we move from the stars to the tide pool, from outer space to inner space. Quoting Adrienne Rich, the North American poet, in her poem Diving into the Wreck, "I go down, rung after rung, and still the oxygen immerses me. The blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down. My flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder. And there is no one to tell me when the ocean will begin." The story of the tide pool is the magical, wondrous tale of life and life forms that have sprung from it, the myth and folklore that surround it. The magic is that at some point, star water turns fish water, because once water made Earth its home, in time, life originated on Earth. One theory speaks about thermal vents at the bottom of the Earth's oceans, where strange life forms congregate around black smokers that vent nutrient-rich chemicals. From that or from other murky origins, water found its way to our human cells. 70% of our body is water. Water is life's true and unique medium, says Philip Ball. Without it, life cannot be sustained. It is the fluid that lubricates the workings of the cell, transporting the materials and molecular machinery from one place to another, and facilitating the chemical reactions that keep us going. As Astrida Naimanis, who is a lecturer at the University of Sydney, writes, blood, bile, intracellular fluid, a small ocean swallowed, a wild wetland in our gut, rivulets forsaken, making their way from our insides to out, from watery womb to watery world. We are bodies of water. And yet we call ourselves terrestrial, ignoring the extraterrestrial in us, or the more than terrestrial. Stony logics and rocky beginnings seem to overshadow our watery ancestry and aqueous origins and composition. We forget that an aquatic environment was the sole milieu for life on Earth. Colonization of the land began only 450 million years ago. So how do we now speak of our current crises in view of the space of water as an urgent territory of engagement? As Barbara Kingsolver writes, water is the visible face of climate and therefore climate change. Or as Astrida Naimanis notes, water constitutes one of the so-called Anthropocene's most urgent, visceral, and ethically fraught sites of political praxis and theoretical inquiry. Our reshaping of this planet is occurring not least through the re-choreography and rematerialization of its waters. Dams, canals, and diversions undermine many vital waterways. This story is one of our species' will to control and order life and scape. Through these spatial practices, we change land and waterscape, refashion time, and live with the runoff pollution from our agriculture and our industrial activity. Ice caps melting, depleting groundwater, devastating floods, storms, unpredictable monsoons, fierce tides, pollution, and contamination of our rivers and oceans. Too little water, too much of it, drought, desertification on one end, and rising sea levels, threatening islands and low-lying areas, fault lines and fate lines intertwined, a litany of assault. Water's histories are also species histories. Humans and more than humans, caught up in the brutal vice that is our human greed and means of production and distribution. The geographer Jamie Linton refers to this imaginary as modern water. And what we see is the great unraveling brought about by modern water. From interference with whale song to the destruction of our wetlands and marshes, essential for a healthy planet. These are the wounds we humans have inflicted on water. Sometimes tears are not enough. Clearly, words are not. But these wounds are not all made equally, and we do not bear its brunt fairly. Stories of empire, colonization, plantations are imbricated in water's histories, from the slave trade that stole black and brown bodies across oceans. These are violent cartographies, and these water maps are written in the blood of slaves. Modern water now gives us modern catastrophes, the refugees perishing as they find a new home, and the climate refugees escaping storms and island homes that are vanishing fast. But our relationship to water is also contradictory and complex. There are other cartographies, languages, and lexicons that we will also explore in our episodes that will speak of other ways of living with water, emphasizing our kinship our indigenous knowledges, a history of resistance to modern water, and humans who have had other relationships with water, who could read the stars and listen to the seas, whose relationships with more than humans translate to a different journey from the stars to the tide pool, a different forked path. From the stars to the tide pool is a tale of magic, of diving into a wreck, of embracing difference, articulating agency, and accounting for our water wounds. It is a journey from the outer to the inner space of water, to coming to terms with our fishy beginnings and our watery selves, and learning to swim towards unknowable futures. For this episode, I would like to thank Tushar Das, who helped put together the sound for this episode, Kritya Basanini, who helped me record this and guided me. Any mistakes are my own. And Siddharth Shekhar, our intern, who introduced me to hydrofeminism. The Subverse is the podcast of Dark and Light, a digital space that chronicles the times we live in and reimagines futures with a focus on science, nature, social justice, and culture. You can follow us on Instagram at Dark and Light Zine. If you like the show, please tell a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. The Subverse is produced for us by Vakka Media. So long, and thanks for listening.